All right, take a look around you right now. I'll bet you can spot some aluminum. It's in your phone, your laptop, the foil in your kitchen drawer, and even the airplanes flying thousands of feet above your head. And here's the wild part. It's the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust. But for most of human history, we had no idea it was even there. So today, we're going to uncover the incredible story of how we turn reddish dirt into this lightweight, infinitely recyclable miracle metal. To really get your head around just how special aluminum is, we've got to travel back to the 19th century. Back then, this stuff was more valuable than gold. I mean, just think about this quote. The Emperor of France, Napoleon III, would host these massive state dinners. For his most honored guests, he'd break out the aluminum cutlery. And everyone else, well, they had to make do with plain old silver. Can you imagine silver being the second best option? So that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? How did this precious imperial treasure become so common that we use it for soda cans and just toss it in the recycling bin without a second thought? How did it go from being a metal for kings to a material we barely even notice? Well, that's the incredible journey we're about to take. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with its glamorous past as the metal of emperors. Then we'll get our hands dirty and see how it's made, going from red earth to powder. Next, we'll witness the spark of genius that changed everything. After that, we'll explore aluminum's infinite loop of recycling. And we'll finish up by looking at how we're forging a cleaner future. Let's get into it. First up, the metal of emperors. We're setting the scene here, going back to a time when aluminum was the ultimate status symbol. Now, the key thing to get here is that its value didn't come from being rare in the ground. In fact, aluminum is the third most common element in the Earth's crust. No, its value came from how ridiculously hard it was to get out of the ore. The metal is chemically locked inside with an incredibly strong bond, and for decades, nobody knew how to break it free on a large scale. It was like a treasure locked in an unbreakable vault. So how did we finally crack the code? That brings us to part 2, from red earth to powder. This is the story of solving that first giant piece of the puzzle, getting a usable raw material out of the ground. It all starts with this stuff, bauxite. It's a reddish, clay-like rock that's usually mined just below the surface in tropical areas. This rock is packed with aluminum, but not in a way we can use. The aluminum is all tangled up with oxygen, forming something called aluminum oxide, or alumina. And get this, it takes about 4 tons of this bauxite rock to produce just 1 ton of finished aluminum. So how do you separate the good stuff from the rock? You use some brilliant chemistry called the Bayer process, which was invented back in 1887. First, you crush up the bauxite and dissolve it in a hot solution of caustic soda. This separates the aluminum compounds. Next, you filter out all the impurities, like iron and silicon, which leaves behind a waste product called red mud. Then you cool the remaining liquid and add tiny seed crystals, which encourages pure aluminum hydroxide crystals to form and fall to the bottom. And finally, you bake those crystals at a scorching temperature, over 960 degrees Celsius, to drive off all the water. And the result is this wild transformation, from a reddish-brown rock into a pure white powder called alumina that looks a lot like sugar. But, and this is a big but, we're not done yet. This is aluminum oxide. The aluminum is still chemically handcuffed to oxygen. We've purified the ore, yes, but we still haven't made a single ounce of actual metal. And that leads us to our third section, a spark of genius. This is where we finally solve the biggest problem of all, breaking that incredibly strong aluminum-oxygen bond to finally create pure metal. And the timing of this is just amazing. In 1886, 2 young inventors, an American named Charles Martin Hall and a Frenchman named Paul Héroult, both figured out the secret to smelting aluminum at the exact same time without ever having met. Just 1 year later, Carl Baer perfected his process to supply them with the pure alumina they needed. It was this perfect 1-2 punch of innovation that launched the entire modern aluminum age. The secret they discovered is known as the hall-heroult process, and it's basically the same one used today. The core idea is simple but so powerful. If a chemical bond is too strong to break with just heat, you zap it with a massive jolt of electricity. It's a process called electrolysis. So here's how it works. You take that white alumina powder and dissolve it in a bath of another molten mineral called cryolite, inside these giant carbon-lined containers called pots. The whole thing is heated to over 950 degrees Celsius. Then you pass a massive electric current through this molten bath.
That current is the spark of genius. It's so powerful, it literally rips the oxygen atoms away from the aluminum atoms. The newly freed molten aluminum is heavier, so it sinks to the bottom where it can be siphoned off as 99.8% pure liquid metal. This was the breakthrough that turned aluminum from a curiosity into a global commodity.
So we've finally unlocked the metal. But this process created a brand new challenge. It uses a tremendous amount of energy. And that brings us to section 4, aluminum's infinite loop, and what you could call the metal's modern superpower. So to make just 1 ton of brand new aluminum, it takes about 14,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. That is a colossal amount of energy. You can think of it like this. All of that massive energy input gets banked inside the metal itself. But here is the magic. To recycle aluminum, you don't have to break that chemical bond all over again. You just have to melt it. And that takes only about 5% of the original energy. A 95% energy saving? It's like making a small withdrawal from that energy bank instead of having to earn it all over again from scratch. This is why recycling aluminum is so incredibly important. And this is the result. This statistic is simply staggering. An estimated 75%, 3/4, of all the aluminum ever produced since the 1880s is still in use today. Just think about that for a second. The metal isn't consumed or destroyed, it's just used and can be used again and again and again, almost forever. Now, while the energy savings are huge, recycling isn't some perfect magic solution. It's a pretty complex industrial challenge. When you melt different products together, say a window frame, a car part, and a soda can, you create this metallurgical soup of different alloys. Impurities like iron and silicon are tough to remove and can build up. You also always lose a little bit of the metal to oxidation. Because of all this, high-grade scrap is often downgraded and used for lower-quality products as a way to manage these impurities. This brings us to our final section, forging a cleaner future. We've tackled the cost and the energy, but what about the carbon footprint of making new aluminum? This is where the next great innovation is happening. Okay, so remember those large carbon blocks, the anodes that the electric current passes through? Well, in the traditional process, when the oxygen is ripped from the alumina, it combines with that carbon and is released as CO2. The anode literally gets consumed. But there's a revolutionary new technology, often called the ELYSIS process, that replaces those carbon anodes with a stable material that doesn't get used up. They're inert. So when the oxygen is released, it has nothing to react with. The process goes from emitting carbon dioxide to emitting pure, breathable oxygen. I'm not kidding. And the impact, when you look at the hard numbers, is dramatic. Just look at that row for electrolysis, the smelting process itself. Emissions drop from 1.4 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum down to 0, a flat 0. The total direct emissions from producing new aluminum could fall by over 90%. This isn't just a small improvement, it's a fundamental reinvention of the whole process. So we end right where we began, with this idea of a miracle metal. We've seen its journey from a treasure for emperors to the backbone of modern life. Now, with technology that can eliminate its main carbon footprint by literally emitting pure oxygen, it poses a fascinating question. Can this metal that was once so hard to pull from the earth actually help us build a truly sustainable future? It's pretty amazing to think about.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more How Meets History.